Yes, and no matter where you land on the dollar argument, I think you have to agree it's the most overcrowded trade on the planet right now. And that rally at least will roll over. That wealth's got to go somewhere else. So when can you talk to me about some of the industries or sectors that you're looking at when I think you mentioned foreign stocks. You definitely mentioned companies that are creating value and paying dividends. Are there specific industries? You mentioned resources. Are there other industries?
Yeah, well, apart from the resource sector, and that would be industrial metals, agriculture, energy, there are obvious places to be invested. But we're invested in other businesses, whether it's utilities that are, providing people with power that they need in their lives, or some healthcare companies, medical services, which we all need. Everybody gets sick and everybody wants to get better. And so health is important. And so these healthcare companies are there. Almost an opposite side, though, but is tobacco, because people like to smoke. And so these tobacco companies, if you're addicted to smoking, you're going to smoke. And if the price of cigarettes goes up, well, you're going to keep smoking. And, you'll find a way to pay for it. I mean, those stocks pay good dividends as well. But there's all sorts of companies that service, let's say, the agriculture or the energy sectors, telecommunications. We own quite a few of those. Those stocks have kind of been left for dead for a while. They're pretty cheap, to buy, and they have good dividends. So there's a lot of different stocks that people own. We own some of the beer companies, brewers. People, it's not an expensive drink, but a lot of people drink, and maybe people drink more when times are bad, because that's a cheap way to make yourself feel a little better and escape reality. So we own some of those companies. But there are a lot of different companies that have real value. And people have to go somewhere. I think you just can't be in cash, because all these governments are just printing too much money. The inflation problem is worldwide. And it's because all these central banks made the same mistake. And unfortunately, they were pretty much following the Fed's lead. We're the issuer of the reserve currency. And so everybody else kind of, marches to the beat of our drum. And we had interest rates at 1% or 0. And so everybody else had to come down. In fact, some countries went negative because they wanted their rates to be lower than ours. Well, when our rates are 0, how do you get below 0? So they actually went into uncharted territory in the twilight zone of negative rates, as irrational as that is. But that was only because we were at 0. That's why they had to go negative. They wanted to have easy money in relation to a U.S. Well, the U.S., we went to 0. So we kind of corrupted the monetary policy of the entire world. But I think the world is going to reject the dollar. It's already happening. I mean, in fact, with the sanctions that have been imposed on Russia and the example that we've sent to the world, I already think, the Chinese and a lot of other players are just not liking that and really wanting to take away some of America's power. And the source of that power is the reserve status of the dollar. And we lose that, and it's a whole new ballgame here, because America's ability to live beyond its means is a function of the dollar's reserve status, because we can print dollars and use those dollars that we print to buy goods and services, mainly goods that we didn't produce. It's kind of like these guys that issue cryptocurrencies out of thin air, right? That FTX token cost Bankman-Fried nothing to create, and he could just issuing them and have this huge value. Well, we do the same thing with the dollar. Cost us nothing. We create them out of thin air, and then everybody assigns a value to them.
Do you think there's a possibility or what do you think the possibilities are for the future of gold to play an official role back in an official monetary role, whether this is oil begins to be priced in gold, or some kind of a cryptocurrency or stable coin is backed by gold?
Yeah. There's no question that gold is going to reemerge as the monetary unit of choice for the world. I mean, it's not an accident that gold was money for 5,000 years. It's been money for so long because it works. But governments, didn't like the gold standard, because if they wanted to spend money, they needed the gold. And so they needed to collect it through taxes, because they didn't have gold. The private sector had gold. And so if the government wanted gold to pay for some spending program. They had to take it from the people. Well, as much as the people like government programs, they also hate paying taxes. And so governments wanted a way to have their cake and eat it too. They wanted to give people government programs, but not give them the bill. Now, one way is like, well, we're going to tax the rich, right? Don't worry about it. We're going to give you all these goodies, but the rich people are going to pay for it, right? Well, eventually, you've taxed the rich to the point that you can't tax them any higher, or they'll, and now you have just the middle class left, and there, they don't want to pay more taxes. So they just print money. We run these huge deficits, and we pay for government with inflation. And that's why we have so much inflation, because we have so much government that we didn't pay for through taxation. So we're paying for it through inflation, which means higher prices. So I think that the free market is going to reject the dollar and other currencies because they're a flawed form of money, because they are no longer a store of value, right? They can still function as a medium of exchange. You can still use them as a unit of account, but if they're not a good store of value, then they're not good as a medium of deferred payment. They're not good for lending and borrowing, because you really have no idea. If I loan you my dollars for 10 years, I mean, in a high inflation environment, I have no idea what those dollars might buy me in 10 years. They may buy me nothing. So when the public starts to lose confidence in the value of the dollar, what are they going to use as an alternative? Well, they could use gold. Now, the inconvenience of using gold is, well, I've got a bar of gold, or I got a gold coin. I mean, one gold coin, how am I gonna buy things with it? I mean, how am I gonna just, exchange it? Now, of course, at one point we did do that. People had gold coins in their pockets, and they had bills in their pockets that were backed by gold. And if they wanted to buy something small, well, they paid in silver, or they paid in nickel, or they paid in copper, right? That's the penny. But today, because of the technology that we have now, that we didn't have in the past when we were using gold as money, because we have the internet, because we have blockchain, we can tokenize the ownership of gold and issue digital currency backed by gold instead of paper currency backed by gold that can circulate as a medium of exchange very efficiently, so that people can make big ticket purchases with gold. I could buy a car and pay in gold, or I could buy a pack of chewing gum and pay in gold, because you can break gold down into a fraction of a gram, and then I can send that fraction of a gram around the world for a fraction of a cent. So it's like, the current technology, and that's the irony, because all these Bitcoin guys were like, oh, see, blockchain is the death of gold. No, it's going to lead to the rebirth of gold, because Bitcoin is what we don't need. Gold is what gives the digital currency its value, because gold actually is the store of value. But with blockchain, it's a better medium of exchange than it had been in the past, because it has all the attributes of Bitcoin, except better, because it's faster and cheaper to transact. But it's also a store of value, which Bitcoin can never be, because Bitcoin has no underlying value that can be stored.
Now, what are the challenges with that? And I think, okay, so on paper it makes sense, but where's the guarantee that XYZ cryptocurrency is actually backed by gold? It's just in the trust of some auditing committee, correct?
Right, but there was never a guarantee, and it worked for hundreds of years with paper. You have trusted third parties that compete in a free market, and there will be certain tokens that will have a higher degree of trust, and therefore will be more marketable than other tokens. And of course, companies can say our gold is audited. Here's our independent auditors. We have insurance. We've paid, let's say, Lloyd's of London to insure our gold. So even if it gets stolen, Lloyd's has, we've bought an insurance policy. And then, of course, if Lloyd's is insuring the gold, then you have another set of eyes that's going to make sure that it's secure. Otherwise, they won't write the insurance policy. You can store it with a company like Brinks, right? Brinks has been storing precious metals for over 150 years. They've never lost an ounce. That seems like a pretty good track record. So
Yes.
look, trusting third parties is what everybody does in capitalism. I mean, if you have life insurance, you've trusted a third party to pay the claim, when you die. The same
Yeah.
thing with fire insurance or auto insurance. All insurance requires a third party to pay in the event that whatever you insured against happens. That doesn't stop people from buying insurance because they have to trust a third party. They just make sure when they buy insurance, they buy it from a third party they can trust. And
Yeah.
what do these insurance companies do to preserve that trust? Well, that trust is value. That's their brand. That is their goodwill of their company that they want to preserve. And so it's fine. The idea that says, hey, we can't use gold as money because we need to trust a third party is nonsense. We've always been trusting third parties, and it's worked. The only time it doesn't work is when the third party is a government. That's when they screwed us, because when we trusted the government, like when we trusted the United States government, because the government had the gold and they said, hey, here's our notes, they're backed by gold. What did Nixon do? Nixon devalued twice, although Roosevelt devalued first. He took the gold, the dollar, and said, hey, it was worth, gold was at $20 an ounce, and now it's 35. So now you need $35 to buy an ounce of gold. Before you needed 20. But then Nixon says, well, he devalued it from 35 to like 40 and then 42. But then he said, you know what? I'm defaulting. We're not giving you any gold for your paper. So the US government screwed everybody. The private sector doesn't have a history of doing that. It's government. So that's why I'm saying that I think it's the private sector that is going to lead the world back to a gold standard. Not governments. Governments don't have any vested interest to want to do this, but the public does, right? Just like, did the post office have a vested interest in Federal Express? No, but the free market did. Taxi cabs didn't want Ubers, but now they're here, right?
Yeah.
Why are they there? Because the government provided, oligopolies, with, these taxi cabs. They were overcharging people. So that was a window. The post office is a monopoly, overcharge people. The government has a monopoly on money, and we're being overcharged through inflation to use government money. So the private sector comes up with an alternative. But Bitcoin won't work as an alternative, but gold will, based on the same principles, utilizing blockchain and the internet.
No, I agree with you. And look, like I hold physical gold and silver, and I could envision that world. I can't, but I think a realistic barrier to that is the next 2 and 3 generations of investors, consumers, all of this. They've been nurtured in a 99% virtual world, right? They've lived their whole life in the digital landscape, and there's going to be a barrier for them to understand this hard asset mentality. And that's part of the reason. Plus, they've been indoctrinated by the rise of cryptocurrencies, and that this could be a sound money, and it's decentralized. So therefore, it lacks corruption and manipulation. And, if you have the keys, then you have possession like you would of physical coins. And so how do you think that the message that you're discussing and that I buy into could be communicated and educated, right, to the next 2 and 3 generations, which are going to carry the torch and pick it up?
Well, look at how they were able to spread Bitcoin's message. Look at how many people around the world not only know about Bitcoin, own Bitcoin. So in many respects, it's a similar message. It just doesn't have the get rich quick element. And that's what kind of made Bitcoin appealing to certain people, was that they thought they would get rich buying it. So when you're talking about using gold as money and a crypto backed by gold, you're not talking about a get rich quick scheme, but you're just talking about empowering people to have a better monetary system so that they don't go broke, so that they can save and have their savings grow in value over time rather than sink, and freeing a lot of people from a banking system and making it easier for people in a lot of countries who are unbanked to actually easily have a account that they could use to facilitate payments, so that they can buy whatever they want, or they can receive money in exchange for their services and be paid. And the beauty of gold is it's a universal money. It's the same all over the world. And so, you could be a poor person in Africa and you could just be, taxing around tourists that come to your country, and they could just easily pay you in gold through your smartphone, and you could receive your payments. Doesn't matter whether they're coming from the United Kingdom, the United States, France, Japan, Australia. They could all pay you in gold, and then you could use your gold to pay all your bills. And you don't need a bank, and whatever you don't spend that you save, it's going to gain value, because over time prices go down in relation to gold, and you can grow your purchasing power through your savings. So people, I think, when they learn about it, will adopt it. I think merchants, when businesses have an opportunity to be paid in real money, they'd prefer it if it's just as easy to get paid in phony money. I think workers would like their wages in real money, especially people that are signing long-term contracts to be paid over longer periods of time. I mean, inflation can wipe you out, but if you're going to get paid in grams of gold, that's a lot better, especially if you know that your landlord. What if your rent is also in gold? Because your landlord says, I'd rather have this a rent in gold. So now you have your rent in gold, but then your salary is in gold, right? So as the world starts moving away from these fiat currencies to gold, and they start pricing things in terms of gold, right? And the governments are irrelevant. And now they have to be honest, because now if everybody wants gold and nobody wants their paper, well, now if they want to come up with a government program, they're going to have to provide people with gold because that's what everybody wants. And so now they have to be honest. Now they have to have taxes that meet their expenditures. They can't run these massive deficits and monetize them and cover the shortfall by creating inflation.
Now, do you think that what you just discussed has anything to do with the record central bank buying of gold? Because in order to buy something, you have to sell something. If you look at the ledger, it's largely been an exchange of US treasuries in order to buy gold. That's been the transaction. Do you think central banks are thinking about it that way at all, or are those two separate things?
I don't know if they're thinking about the world returning to a gold standard. I think what they are concerned about is the backing behind their own currency. And they recognize that dollars are going to lose a lot of value based on the enormity of US government deficits and the size of our debt, and the fact that we just can't possibly service the debt, let alone repay the debt. You also have the baby boom generation, of which I'm a part of. We're in retirement, and more of us are entering retirement, and it's a huge generation. I mean, I'm at the tail end of the baby boom. I'm about to turn 60, but there's a lot of people that are just around my age or are now already 65 and they're retiring, and Social Security is broke. And so it's already spending more than it's collecting, especially with the labor force participation rate so low. And so this massive deficits have to be funded, these unfunded liabilities. And central banks realize that the dollar is going to lose a lot of value. Treasuries are going to lose a lot of value. So they're holding all these dollars, all these treasuries. So they want to get rid of them. But what do they want to buy? I mean, they got to buy something. They're not going to just spend it. So they're buying gold. I mean, gold's a better asset. I suppose they could sell their dollars and buy euros, or they could buy yen, but you got problems in Europe. You got problems in Japan. Gold is a monetary asset that's nobody else's liability, and you don't have to worry about a country, overprinting gold, because they can't print gold. It has to be mined, and the production of gold is slow. Maybe the supply will increase 1.5% next year. The supply of fiat currencies will grow at a minimum 5 to 10%, maybe more, depending on the currency. So there's massive inflation in the fiat world. You don't have that with real money. So central banks are doing this. And I also think too, as I said earlier, Russia had reserves in dollars that got frozen, but their reserves in gold, they still have those. Yeah. And so the message that we sent to the world is that your reserves had better be in gold, because that's the only way to keep them safe. Because if they're in dollars, well, we tell you what you could do with those reserves. And if you do something we don't like, you're not going to have those reserves. That doesn't inspire a lot of confidence. in people. Why would you want to hold your reserves in a currency where the United States could just yank it away from you? Like if you do something America doesn't like, they're in a position to punish you. Well, I wouldn't want to be in that position, especially if I know America doesn't like me, right? Like China, right? Everybody wants to bash China. They've got trillions of dollars over there. You know,
Mhm.
they've loaned us all this money. And so I would think, shit, we want to get rid of this. And I think that's what they're doing. They're just divesting themselves of dollars. And what that means is our ability to export our inflation to China is coming to an end, because that's what we did for years. The Chinese sent us goods and we sent them paper. And they took that paper and they bought our bonds. And it was a win for us because we got cheap prices and low interest rates. But you know that we're going to lose that ability. And that's, you know, that's a big change for the United States. It means a much lower standard of living for Americans.
Yeah, that's a very significant event. And I wonder if in 10 years, we'll look back on that freezing of US dollar reserves by the US government towards Russia as significant as we now look back on Nixon taking the US dollar off the gold standard. If we'll look back on it with similar significance. Now, I know
Yeah,
you.
I mean, I think the world was going to move away from the dollar as a reserve anyway. It was inevitable. But I think that action certainly sped up the process. So
Right.
it will happen sooner as a result of that action than it would have happened anyway. But it was inevitable that it was going to happen. In fact, it should have already happened. It's long overdue.
Yeah. Okay. Now, look, I know you got to jump here, but I have one more question for you. It's December 13th for context. In the last 24 hours, $1.9 billion was withdrawn from Binance. I don't think we fully understand the full contagion of the initial June crypto crash, the FTX crash. Is Binance next? Peter, what do you have to say?
You know, I don't know what's next. I mean, I think all of these platforms that had any kind of debt or that offered any kind of yield on investments of crypto are inherently suspect. You know, just like, you know, I did some debates with this guy, Mishinsky from Celsius. And when he told me about the interest he was paying, I immediately thought, okay, well, this is some kind of Ponzi. You know, this is impossible. What kind of risk? And he was like denying, oh, we're not taking any risks. A few months later, the whole thing is bankrupt. In fact, I think if I would have looked into Sam Bankman-Fried's company and FTX, if I would have spent 10 minutes like doing some due diligence, I would have spotted the fraud myself. I just never even looked at it. That was my mistake. I should have like paid more attention to it. But I mean, I never considered putting any money there. I mean, had I been thinking about it, then I would have. But you know, when I look back at some of the interviews now that I never saw earlier, because I didn't really pay attention, it's like this was like such a, you know, flashing red light, this guy. And the fact that people just accepted that he was worth close to $30 billion. How? What did he do? He has some exchange? How does he have all this value? Where's he getting all this money? I mean, and this kid, I mean, this young guy that doesn't even know how to comb his hair. You tell me he's got all, you know, the whole thing's just didn't smell right when you just look at it. But, you know, there's a lot of potential blowups. What about Tether? I mean, how does Tether actually have, you know, dollars, and how much of Tether's reserves maybe were in FTX liabilities? How much money did FTX load Tether? I don't know. They're not audited. I mean, what if Tether doesn't have anywhere near the dollars? What if there's a run on Tether? Because Tether supplies a lot of liquidity to Bitcoin and other cryptos. So if the Tether has no value, how you can, you know, you no longer have a way to buy, you know, and a lot of people that have sold their Bitcoin and got paid Tether, if the Tether has no value, they got nothing for their Bitcoin. So I don't know, but I think there's a lot more shoes to drop. I think this is going to be the textbook centipede when it comes to shoe dropping. And FTX wasn't even the first one. As I said, there were other bankruptcies that happened before FTX. And in fact, FTX was trying to bail out some of the companies that went bankrupt before it. That was the irony of it, because it itself was broke and it was bailing out all these companies. And now, of course, who's going to bail out the next company that fails? Because the company that was bailing them out, well, it's failed too. So I just think this whole thing is going to unravel. This was a crazy mania that was a byproduct of central banks and the casino-like environment that was created as a result of massive inflation, 0% interest rates, and quantitative easing. And I know all the politicians are going to want to blame capitalism and claim, oh, this proves that we need more government. We don't need more government. We need less government. We need more common sense. We need more personal responsibility.
Yes.
That's the best safeguard against fraud and this kind of stuff. Government regulators are always corrupted by the people they regulate, and it always results in more fraud and more people losing money than if we had free market forces that would be doing a better job. But it's amazing to me that so many people are still in denial that are in this space, that are looking at Bitcoin at 17,000. It popped up today, so now it's closer to 18 or 7, whatever it is, and not realizing that they could still sell. I mean, they're like trapped in this mentality that, oh my God, I can't sell it at 17 because it used to be 69 and it's 70% down, and oh, it's a bargain. I can't sell. It's $17,000 for nothing. $17,000 is a lot more than zero, which is ultimately where they're going. But you can't be fooled into thinking that because it once was 69,000, that represents some benchmark that it's going to return to someday, and that anything below that is just a sale. It's a going out of business sale. So the prices are going to keep getting marked down. And the longer you wait to sell, the bigger the markdown you're going to see in order to sell later.
You hit on an important point there. The personal responsibility is what's missing from this, because what I've seen a lot of on Twitter is people pointing the finger at the media saying, you didn't do your job. You should have investigated this sooner. You should have spotted this fraud, or at regulation. You should have protected us from scenarios like this. And I'm asking the question, why is nobody just pointing the finger at the investors for not doing diligence before allocating your capital, right?
Yes,
you're gonna put
the media was complicit because they were bought and paid for. They were shills because these crypto companies were buying ads on all these networks. Yeah. And so the reporters and the shows didn't want to criticize their customers. In fact, they wanted to give them some free publicity to get the paid publicity. So everybody was in on the action. But I was out there, screaming. I was like taking CNBC to task so often. I was like, these guys are doing a horrible service to their audience. They are treating this like it's an actual investment. They're putting one shill after another on their network to talk their book and pump up this crap. And there's no counterbalance. There's nobody like me on there saying it's all a bunch of nonsense. And all of the reporters were all eating it all up, all the anchors. And it's just fueling it. But, what's going to happen? And I've been saying this since the beginning. Everybody who made money in crypto, including the people who were paid to advertise crypto, they're all going to get sued, by the people who lost money. I mean, at the end, the lawyers are going to have the money. That's unfortunately how it always works. But everybody who lost money is going to sue everybody who made money. That's just it. That's how it's all going to end. Because, it's a zero-sum game, right? It was all a transfer of wealth. Some people made money because other people lost money, because no real value was created out of Bitcoin. It was just a transfer mechanism from the people who sold it to the people who bought it. Well, it's a Bernie Madoff thing. It's a natural Ponzi, a pyramid scheme, a chain letter. It's like it was a chain letter on the blockchain, but that doesn't change the nature of what it was. Because actual chain letters are illegal. But if you have a blockchain letter, somehow it's legal.
Right. Okay. This is my last question, I promise. So just because you touched on the media incentives, right? And I've been very curious why Sam Bankman-Fried has been getting such a white glove handling from media. Every interview he's done, he's just been lobbed these softball questions. And it's like, what is going on here? And then he's arrested the day before he's supposed to testify to Congress, like saving this kid probably from incriminating himself. So
that's what I said. I said, normally these government prosecutors are a lot shrewder than that. I mean, if you knew that a guy that you were about to charge was going to go on record and testify under oath in front of Congress, I'd like, let's wait for that. I mean, let's see what he says that we could use against him, because he's waiving his Fifth Amendment rights. He's going to go out there and say a bunch of stuff. It didn't make any sense. They should have arrested him after he finished testifying, not before. But I think the reason that the media is treating him the way They are. First, they want the interviews, right? So they know, like, shit, we want this is a major coup. We can interview this guy, so but we got to treat him nice, or he will leave.
Yeah.
But also, part of his fraud was that he was one of the good guys, right? He was a liberal. He supported all these democratic, politically correct causes, and so he didn't, he wasn't out for himself. He wasn't one of those greedy billionaires who just wants to make money. He wanted to give all his money away, right? He was a good guy. He was this new kind of capitalist that earned to give, right? And they still don't realize that was part of his fraud. This guy was as greedy as anybody else. In fact, greedier. He lived a very lavish lifestyle while he pretended that he was driving some beat up Toyota Corolla and, having 10 roommates in some little apartment. I mean, this guy was, surrounding himself with opulence and all the trappings of wealth while pretending he was a monk, and wanted nothing for himself. But, because he was, he had this persona about him, and now he's like acting like, well, I didn't know, I'm this good guy, and I just didn't understand what I was doing. And I just, God, I wish I had done a better job. And, God, I really feel bad that I just wasn't smarter and didn't have more experience. I'm just a kid. I was in my 20s, and, I didn't really know what I was doing. I mean, it's hard to take that much money and not realize that you're taking it. It's I mean, and the thing too, and this is what almost gets me is, you have these people that invested with him, these supposedly smart people that put money with him. And what's worse, that you gave your money to a criminal who stole it, or you gave your money to an incompetent idiot who lost it? I mean, to me, it's almost better to think, oh, he stole it because he's like, I'm completely inexperienced, irresponsible. I have no idea what I'm doing. Yet all these people trusted me. And now all these people that trusted him are now like turning. And when I hear some of these bigwigs, like, Michael Saylor, or Mike Novogratz, criticizing him, and I'm thinking like, you're in a glass house. What are you doing throwing stones? I mean, Michael Saylor, when Bitcoin was over $60,000 a coin or token, whatever it is, he was telling people on television to put all of their net worth in Bitcoin. But when they finished putting everything they had in Bitcoin, he said, that's not enough. Go out and mortgage your house and put that money in Bitcoin. Borrow money on your credit card and put that money in Bitcoin. He was saying that on air. And like the reporters were like, they weren't saying anything. Like, what are you, nuts? How could you possibly be doing that? Anybody who followed his advice is just as wiped out as the person who put money at FTX, maybe more. Maybe they just lost their house because they followed his advice. And so he's now going to be criticizing FTX, but the media lets him get away with it. I mean, he's still one of the favorites. Everybody wants to interview Michael Saylor. Hey, he's got 3 million Twitter followers, right? He's a big crypto guy. But Novogratz or all these guys are out there. They've been pumping this stuff up for years. Recklessly and irresponsibly, was it criminal what they did? I don't know. Maybe it depends on what they were doing. I mean, how much Bitcoin was Michael Saylor selling as he was telling other people to mortgage their house to buy it? I'd be interested in knowing.
Yeah. I mean, either way, exactly. When I heard those statements, I just found it terrifying. You're making those kind of claims about any asset. I mean, it's just, it was so ridiculous.
Well, especially Bitcoin. But I mean, because it's by its very nature, it's highly speculative. So I mean, you wouldn't be going into debt to buy it. That's ridiculous.
Yeah, agreed. Okay, look, Peter, this has been fun. I'm really glad we can make it happen. Thanks so much for coming back on. I'm going to keep pushing to try to get you at my show in January. You told me the deal. So Peter's in Puerto Rico. He said, I got to find a jet.
Yeah, well, I actually could be in Connecticut. I was thinking about going back, but it's so cold. That's the problem. It's so nice here in Puerto Rico in January. You want me to go to Vancouver? And normally when I go there, it's on the weekend, and it's usually the championship for the AFC, NFC, and football. Yeah. Remember one time I did one of your events, and I was watching the football game on my smartphone while I was on my panel.
I remember that.
All right.
Well, leave it with me. I'm going to try to make some magic happen, but I appreciate your time. Thanks for coming back on.
Bye-bye.